All right, today we're jumping into a really fascinating chapter from Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money. It's all about something he calls appealing fictions. You know, those seductive stories we tell ourselves about money, especially when the stakes are really, really high. Understanding this stuff is absolutely crucial. So let's dive right in.
So let's just start with the big mystery, right? Why do we, and I mean even really smart, careful people, get sucked in by financial stories that, looking back, seem almost magical? This question, well, it gets to the very heart of how we deal with money and uncertainty.
And honestly, there is no better example of this than Bernie Madoff. He wasn't selling some complex financial algorithm. Nope, he was selling a simple, compelling story. Steady, amazing returns no matter what. And as the book points out, the story worked because people wanted it to be true. That desire, that's the key to the whole thing.
Okay, so let's really break down what the author calls the seductive lie. This is the actual mechanism that makes us so vulnerable.
Here it is, the core concept, appealing fictions. Look, these aren't just simple mistakes in logic. They're basically emotional necessities. When we desperately need something to work out, our brains just become this fertile ground for any story that promises a solution, no matter what the evidence says. So what's the recipe for this kind of self-deception? Well, it really boils down to two key ingredients. First, you've got incredibly high stakes. We're talking about our entire financial future here. And second, you have this feeling that you have very little control over the outcome. You put those two together, and bam, you become desperate for anything that offers even a tiny sense of certainty. And you know, this is not some new modern problem. The book points out that way back during the Great Plague of London, people were clinging to prophecies and old wives' tales out of just sheer desperation. It's the exact same psychology that drives what Housel calls financial quackery. The potential reward for being right about the market is just so huge that we're willing to believe in forecasters and stories that have, frankly, a terrible track record. Okay, so we know what these appealing fictions are, and we know the conditions that make us fall for them. But why? Why are our brains so hardwired to create them in the first place? Let's take a look at how our minds actually work. The whole problem really starts right here. The world, and especially the financial world, is just this messy, chaotic, unbelievably complex system. And our brains, well, they're just not built for that level of complexity. So to cope, we instinctively create simple stories. We fill in the giant gaps in our knowledge with narratives that make the world feel predictable and understandable, even when it's anything but. This is the crucial takeaway, and it's captured perfectly by Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman. Our brain's main job isn't to be accurate. Its job is to create a story that makes sense, one that allows us to function. This illusion of understanding is a super powerful and often pretty dangerous feature of how we think.
I love this analogy from the book. It just illustrates our situation so perfectly. Imagine an alien orbiting Earth. It can see our actions, people going to work, buying stuff, but it has absolutely no clue about the dreams, the fears, and the stories driving all that activity. The book's big point is we are all that alien. We see what other people do with their money, but we never know the full story behind it. And this slide really highlights a critical difference. I mean, on one side, you have fields of precision, like a NASA mission to Pluto. We can forecast that stuff with incredible accuracy. But on the other side, you have fields of uncertainty, like investing. We're dealing with luck, risk, and human emotion. The danger is that our brains try to apply the same predictable storytelling to investing as if it were physics, and it's not. Okay, so that's the problem. And yeah, it sounds a bit scary. But the good news is, the chapter gives us two really powerful antidotes. Let's start with the first one. This right here is such a critical idea. The best defense isn't trying to be a better fortune teller. It's about arranging your finances so that you don't need your predictions to come true. The bigger the gap between what you want to happen and what you absolutely need to happen, well, the safer you're going to be. To put it really simply, when your financial survival doesn't hinge on one single perfect outcome, you're psychologically insulated. You have the freedom to accept reality for what it is, messy and unpredictable, because one setback isn't going to completely wipe you out. It's a buffer against both financial risk and our own psychological biases. Okay, let's move on to the second antidote. This one is less about your bank account and more about your mindset. This is all about humility.
The absolute best defense against our brain's tendency to fill in the gaps with fiction is to just acknowledge that the gaps exist in the first place. When you accept that your view of the world is incomplete and that luck and risk play a huge role, you short-circuit that need to invent a flawed story to begin with.
All right, let's bring these two powerful ideas together into a clear, actionable strategy to defend ourselves.
First, you've got to build that fortress of safety. This is the practical stuff, right? It means things like saving for goals you haven't even thought of yet. It means not being so leveraged that one bad roll of the dice can ruin you. This is your real-world, tangible defense. And second, it's about cultivating the right mindset. You have to actively remind yourself that you don't have all the answers. So when you see the market crash or a stock go to the moon, resist that powerful urge to invent a neat little story for it. Instead, just try to embrace the messy reality of chance and uncertainty.
So we'll end with the one question this chapter pretty much forces all of us to ask ourselves. In your career, in your investments, in your own financial life, what's the story you desperately want to be true? Because just recognizing it, that's the first and most important step to protecting yourself from it.